my name is Annie and welcome back to my channel. Magic and the supernatural are present in a lot of medieval works. Sometimes they create a conflict, sometimes they provide the resolution to a conflict. And even though romances are often grounded in reality, they always have something of the marvelous and the fantastic. However, magic and the people who practice magic aren't clear-cut as good or evil. They're always in-betweens and ambiguous creatures. Because of the ambiguity of magic, many facets of it are presented throughout medieval literature through different characters. Sometimes they are something that is fully marvelous from the world of fairies, and sometimes they're something that is learned like a science. And there are characters that are everywhere in between. So I picked out a few characters that I think illustrate these different forms of magic in medieval literature. And I will talk about them today to try and illustrate a bit more of what magic is like in medieval literature. Perhaps the most ambiguous of magical creatures in medieval texts are the fairies. Fairies aren't either evil or good. They are mostly neutral and they're somehow disconnected with the human world and the courtly affairs. They're always just doing their own thing. And so they sometimes lack motivation in their actions. Their actions seem a bit arbitrary. The world of fairies is something completely foreign, completely magical, and it pushes the boundaries of what is acceptable or not. And so they usually have a lot of connections with desire and sexuality. A romance that illustrates a type of fairy that appears quite a lot is Sir Launfal, and it shows the motif of the fairy mistress. Sir Launfal is a 14th century romance which was based on Marie de France's 12th century Launval. And it tells the story of Sir Launfal, who is a knight at King Arthur's court. So he's wandering the forest and he sits down by a tree and is approached by two beautiful maidens who are very richly dressed. And they say that their dame is summoning him. And Launfal is led to this beautiful pavilion, which is decorated with crystals and gold and is described as something that no other human had ever seen. And the dame that summoned him is Tryamour, who is the daughter of the king of the fairies. She is laying on a bed, almost naked, waiting for him. She says that she loves him and wants to give him infinite riches, and he accepts and sleeps with her. The only condition for this love and riches are that Launfal should not boast of her in any way, so he should not say that he has this beautiful fairy queen who is in love with him, or say that he has these riches, and he promises to do so. And as we can see, Tryamour, with her nakedness, her beautiful self, and her richness, she provides us with the perfect example of a fairy mistress who has a lot to do with wish fulfillment. She is just perfect and she loves the knight immediately. And immediately when we see her described, she is something of a completely different world. She doesn't abide with the rules of societies, with her being naked and her summoning the knight, but she also has power over him. She sets all the terms of their relationship, even though she is giving herself to him. And this lady also gives us good examples of the fairy characteristics as we see. She doesn't really have a motivation to love Launfal, she just does. And she doesn't really care for what's going on in the human world. She just is. Let's move one step away from the complete otherworldliness of fairies and go to an in-between. And that we can find in the 14th century romance Mélusine, written by Jean d'Arras. So the romance is about Mélusine, who is the daughter of a human king, the king of Albany, and a fairy. And so Mélusine is half fairy and half human. And she is cursed by her mother to every Saturday transformed into a serpent form when she has a serpent body from the waist down. And the only way to live around this curse is to marry someone who would respect her and not see her on Saturdays. Through her powers, Mélusine arranges to meet the hero, who falls in love with her and marries her. And she showers him with riches, just like Dame Tryamour, and gives him a castle, for example, and they have children together. And for a while, he respects her wish to not see her on Saturdays when she transforms into half a snake. But he is influenced by his brother to think that she has demonic magic and that she's evil, and he peeks on her and he sees her in her fairy form. However, she doesn't revert to her fairy form immediately. That only happens when her husband publicly denounces her as that monstrous thing. And so Melusine transforms into a serpent and flies away. So Melusine is a very interesting case because she does share a lot of similarities with the fairy mistress that we already talked about, but she has a lot of human characteristics, and she wants to stay human. She wants to contain her fairy self, that serpent body, that monstrous body, into the Saturday. So she has the wondrous powers of a fairy, but she has the complexities of a human, which allow her to be ultimately betrayed, and that make her a very interesting character who is in this liminal space between humanity and a fairy. So the third enchantress that I'll be talking about is Melior, who is present in the 15th century romance Partonope de Blois. So Melior is a human enchantress, but as we'll see, that is only revealed later in the text, and she has this mysterious fairy-like appearance before. In this romance, the hero Partonope is hunting in the woods and he gets lost, again a theme in our fairy encounters, and he boards this magical boat that has no crew, but the boat leads him to an empty city. And he enters a palace and is served by invisible servants. He eats dinner and then he is led to a bedchamber. And in the bed, there is an invisible woman. And this woman is Melior. Melior tells Partonope that she will fulfill all his desires, but on the condition that she must remain invisible to him for 2.5 years, and then they will be married. And if he sees her, the consequences will be absolutely terrible. And Partonope promises that. But meanwhile, in these 2 years, Partonope goes back home and his mother is convinced that Melior is using dark magic. And she gives Partonope a magic lantern to shine upon Melior's body and see her. And he does that. And when he does that, Melior is devastated, and she says that he has done her a horrible shame. So far in the romance, we can see that Melior has a lot of parallels to the fairy creatures we've seen before. She is very mysterious, we don't know where her powers are coming from, and she also gives herself to the hero and gives him riches. But once she is revealed, Melior says to Partonope that she is the queen of Byzantium, and she learned magic together with science, and she was versed in enchantments. And through those enchantments and through her learning, she was able to bring him there and create this place for them to be together. But Melior makes the distinction that her magic is from God. Again, even though she uses the arts of illusions and invisibility, which can often be associated with dark magic, she tells Partonope that she is not using that kind of magic, even though she is versed in it. So Melior is an example of how magic can be described in an ambiguous way, because though we learn that she is versed in witchcraft, her magic is never portrayed as evil, and she is never portrayed as evil. So it's really a good example of how the magic is defined by the person who practices it. So while Melior is a human enchantress, she is shrouded by these mystical fairy-like characteristics, and so she's a very interesting transition from the fairy magic to the more human magic, and that magic that is learned. And the fourth enchantress that I will be talking about is, I think, the best example of the figure of the witch in medieval literature, and that is Medea. And you might be familiar with the legend of Medea, as she's a prominent figure in classical literature. She is best known from Euripides' tragedy Medea. The legend goes that she helped Jason achieve the Golden Fleece through her magic. She's a very powerful sorceress, sometimes associated with gods, and she helps him achieve his goal and eventually marries him. But after years of marriage, Jason leaves her and her 2 sons and goes to marry another woman. So Medea kills the woman that Jason was gonna marry, and then she kills her own 2 sons. In medieval literature, Medea gets her story told many times, and while she is always portrayed as a powerful enchantress, the focus of the story is not always on the tragedy at the end, but on Jason's betrayal of Medea. And her magic, because of this, is not always portrayed as something negative. Sometimes it is more of a natural magic made by healing potions and ointments and herbs, and is something that is learned. That's how Christine de Pizan describes her. She describes her as a very wise woman. Geoffrey Chaucer in the Legend of Good Women has one of the legends dedicated to Medea, and the focus is on how Jason betrayed Medea, and as she was a good woman, it was very unjust. Chaucer describes Medea as wise and fair, and he doesn't really go into Medea's magic. But there is one line in which he says that she helped Jason through the sleight of her enchantment. And that is basically all the magic that is in the text. And Chaucer doesn't mention the murder of Medea's sons or Jason's new wife. So the magic isn't really portrayed as dark, but there's that one line, the sleight of her enchantment. So we might interpret that as something a bit darker, but it's not really said. So the other big version of Medea that we have in medieval literature is John Gower's Confessio Amantis. And in this, he goes a bit more into detail about Medea's magic. And this time is not as clear what type of magic she has. She does make potions and healing ointments in Gower's texts, and she also makes protective rings. But there's also mention of Medea doing conjurings and sacrifices, and that definitely goes more towards the dark magic and demonic magic. So in Gower's Medea, we have this very ambiguous magic. She does natural magic through healings and herbs, but she also has that darker association. So Medea becomes a very ambiguous character in medieval literature. So she is a powerful sorceress, but her magic isn't clear-cut. And I think that just goes perfectly with medieval notions of magic that aren't either good or evil. There's always an in-between. So these are just a few characters that start to illustrate the huge spectrum of magic and magical creatures that are in medieval literature. And they go from these full fairies to something that's kind of in between to human enchantresses. And they just start to cover magic. As I said, there's so many different levels of magic that it pops up in different romances and it serves a different function every time. So there is one enchantress which you might notice that is missing from this, and that is Morgan Le Fay. But because she has such a huge tradition in the Arthurian literature, I thought she deserved a video all to herself. So as I said before, these notions of magic in literature are heavily influenced by cultural perceptions of magic. And I just find fascinating how we can see those translated into literature and into these characters. So I hope that you enjoyed learning more about magic, and I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time.